Hey colorful quilters, I am so happy that you're here today. We are going to have our last video of the Super Simple Sampler series. If you're just tuning in, you can find the whole series and all of the videos in the playlist for the Super Simple Sampler and see how we've done some of the blocks along the way. The instructions for making all of the blocks are on my website, and you'll find that I'll put a link in the comments below. So go ahead and scroll down and find that link. You can go through and find the instructions to make all 36 of the little sampler blocks. So in one of our videos we talked about making the hourglass blocks, which are going to be the alternating with the sampler blocks. So I have made 36 of the hourglass. Well, I'm on my way to making 36. I still have a few more to make. But so what we're going to do is alternate the hourglass blocks with the sampler blocks to make a quilt. So we have 36 sampler blocks. They're all going to finish 6 inches. And then we're going to have 36 of the hourglass blocks. So today I have a couple more blocks. I'm working on my last couple of blocks. I'm super excited to almost have them all done. And then we are going to lay them out and start sewing the rows together. I wanted to tune back in with you before I finish up all of my blocks and show you one of the important things that really help this project go together faster. I've mentioned a couple of times during other videos about chain piecing, and just in case there are some out there who aren't sure what I mean by that or haven't tried piecing this way, I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that with these last couple blocks as well as some of these hourglass blocks that I have going. So we're going to make a couple of these together. I'll just show you how I can speed up the process by doing more than one block at a time. So I cut, I sew, I press, and kind of in an assembly line, more than one block at a time, and that way at the end I suddenly have a whole bunch of them done, and it's exciting. So I will show you that, and then we'll start sewing some of the blocks together. I want to go over laying them out and then sewing the rows and getting your pressing correct so that your seams line up. So let's get started. We're going to do some chain piecing. We're going to sew up these last 2 blocks, several of our hourglass blocks, and then get started putting our top together. Okay, here we go.
Okay, I have my machine set up, and I keep a little cutting board here next to my machine with some extra space that I can do small cuts if I need to as I go, and also so that I can lay out pieces as I get ready to sew. As you can see, I have sewn some of the hourglass blocks. I've got a chain going here, which just means that I'm sewing more than one piece at a time rather than sewing, cutting, sewing. This is going to make things a lot faster and use less of your thread. So I'm going to sew one more, and if you haven't yet watched the how-to tutorial on making the hourglass blocks, make sure that you check that out. All right, so I have several of these ready to go. The next thing I'm going to do is get ready to sew these last couple of blocks. Now, as you can see, I have 2 of them arranged on my table here in the positions that the pieces are going to be. Okay, so the first pieces that I sew for this block, I'm making kind of a little pinwheel here, but I need to add little corner triangles with these medium pink fabrics to the inside of the dark pink fabric. Okay, so I'm going to put those in place where they go. And what I'm going to do, with these I have to kind of pay attention to make sure that I sew them the right way. What I'm going to do is sew from one corner to the other to make a diagonal seam, and then I will open those up and it'll make a triangle in the corner. Okay, and to help me do that, you'll notice that I have a piece of tape on my sewing machine on the throat. Well, is this the throat plate? Well, on the throat here. That goes from it's in line with my needle and goes out to the front of my sewing machine. And what I use that for is to line up when I'm sewing kind of blindly across these. Now you can mark them if you want. Like I could take my ruler and a pen and mark on that and then sew on that line. But to make it a little bit faster and so that I don't have to do that, I can use this tape on my sewing machine to line it up. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I can sew these 4 all together. And then for my second block, I'm going to, it's made sort of like log cabin style, where you sew the 2 squares together, then you add one, then you add one, and then add one. So these, I'll just sew these 2 squares together to start out with. So that gives me, if I just set these together and ready to sew, that gives me 6 things that I can sew all at once, and then press them all and then go back and start again. So it's going to allow me to sew more than one piece of my block and more than one block at a time. Okay, so let's go to the sewing machine and sew these triangles on. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is sew across these squares. Now, one way you can mark them without having to take the time to get out your ruler and find a pen is just to fold them in half on the diagonal and pinch it. I do this all the time. Just pinch it and that gives you a mark. And then you can place them where you need to go, where they need to go. And here again, make sure that you sew just to the very inside of your crease line or your marked line. And what that's going to do is give you just that slight little bit of extra space for when you fold this back over, and so it'll be nice and straight. Believe it or not, your thread takes up a tiny bit of space, and that starts to add up. If you're even just a little bit to the outside of that line, your piece is going to be short. So you want to be just a hair to the inside. Okay, so, and like I mentioned before, I have this piece of tape that can also guide me, especially if I don't have the piece marked. But what I can do is put my foot up, place my piece where I want it, and then do you see how I have my line that I have marked on my fabric, or the corner of the fabric lined up with the edge of this tape? And then I can put my presser foot down and start sewing. And as I sew, I'm going to keep that corner lined up with the edge of the tape. And that allows me to sew where I want to sew, even if I don't have the piece marked. So I'll show you this one without even marking it. I can get a fairly accurate placement as long as I line up that corner and have my piece nice and straight, start sewing, and keep that lined up with the edge of my tape as I guide it through. Okay, so that's going to give me accurate piecing there without having to take the time to mark them. So I'm going to do all 4 of those pieces and then those 2 little squares for my second block, and then we will cut them all apart and press. Okay, now here's another handy little tool that I'll share with you that I use when I go to cut my pieces apart. So I've got this long string of pieces that I've sewn together, and you see this little perfect purple gadget on the side of my sewing machine? That is from Thread Cutters. They have these cutters in a variety of different styles. You can get ones that go on like a ring on your finger for hand sewing. I chose the one to stick on my machine because I don't do a lot of hand sewing, and I thought this would be the most useful. But basically what you can do is just use that. It has a little cutter inside of it that's protected so that you don't cut your fingers. And I'm just going to cut all my pieces apart this way. some of those bigger ones. Okay, now let's see. Some of these hourglass ones, I still need to sew the other side, so they're not ready to cut apart and press yet. So I'll do those in my next batch. This one is ready to cut and press. And then, of course, these guys are. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, just quickly fold these into place. See, this one's a teeny bit short. I must not have sewn to the inside of the line as well as I should. But basically, I can fold that back, trim down my 1/4 inch seam on each of them, and then go and press them. Okay, and then I will determine which seam I will sew my next chain. Those are those 2 little squares for my other block. Okay, let's press. Okay, we are at the ironing board now. So first of all, I've got some of these triangle units to sew, or to press. All right, good technique for pressing when it comes to quilting is to first press your piece flat, leaving the seam closed, and then getting it warmed up, and then you can open it and the fabric is kind of softened and warm and pliable, and you can kind of gently form the seam open the way that you want it to. And then once you get the seam itself, see how I'm just using the point of my iron to kind of open up that seam, and then I can just put the iron down on it without moving it around a lot, and that will give you a nice flat piece. Well, without stretching it out. You don't want to stretch your piece as you're ironing. So these hourglass ones, here's one that's all finished. So you have this seam in where the seams come together in the middle. I'm going to just gently open that up so that you can see 4 little squares there. What that allows me to do is to separate that center seam so that one goes one way and the other goes the other way, and decreases the bulk a little bit in the middle so that you don't get like a hard lumpy spot in the middle where all those seams come together and all that fabric is in layers. Okay, so I'm going to just press that down there and make sure that I get that one nice and flat. And you'll notice that I'm pressing from the back of my block. For this one, I'm mostly doing that just so that I can see what I'm doing on that. But I also often press from the back if I'm pressing the seam open, or if there's a lot of seams and a lot of fabric and I really want to keep track of where everything is going. A lot of times I'll press from the back first and then turn the piece over and press everything down in the front. Okay, so here are my little squares. I am pressing toward the darker fabric so that in the end you don't see through and see the seam. Okay. And for these little triangle ones, first warm it up and then just pull it out and press it down. And I've gotten in the habit lately of stacking up my fabric and pressing the pieces on top of each other like this. Maybe it's my imagination, but I kind of like it because then each piece gets more than one pressing and they get really nice and flat. You'll notice especially blocks that have a lot of seams, once you start sewing multiple pieces together, if you stack them and press each one more than once, you get really nice flat blocks. Maybe it's just me, but I think so. Okay, let's go back to our table and lay these back out and see what we're going to sew next. Okay, this is where we set up our pieces and place them in position to sew our next chain. Oh, let's see. This one goes, uh-oh, for a second I thought I'd sewn it wrong. Okay, so for this one, my next thing is going to be to sew these lighter rectangles to the long side of the bigger, darker pink rectangles. And to make sure that I sew those right, I lay them in place and then stack them up. Keep those edges lined up. Okay, so that gives me 4 seams I can sew together at once. And then I have these little 2 patches, oops, that are going to go like this. Okay, this block is going to take more steps just because there's more seams. But so for this one, the next step is to sew these light rectangles onto my little 2 patches and add them. So for this chain, I'm going to sew 6 seams and then press them. Okay, I got those seams sewn, so I'm ready to do the next step for these blocks. This one's going to be cute, I think. And then I also went ahead, in addition to those 6 seams on that last chain, I went ahead and sewed a bunch more of my hourglass units, the triangles, and pressed them and got them matched up for the next step on those. So I am going to next add a seam to those so I can work on a bunch of those coming together. And then for this block, I just need to sew the top half and the bottom half together. And then for this one, I'm going to add a short triangle or a short rectangle to my square and a short rectangle here. So I have 4 seams for my blocks and then several of my hourglass units that I can sew again all together and do my next step. Okay, so let's sew and press this step. Okay, there is something rather satisfying about sewing a whole bunch of these pieces together and having them all done at once. And the great thing is that even though it might seem a tiny bit tedious to do each of these steps like this, in the end, it's kind of like each step gets shorter because you're sewing more of your pieces together. And then at the end, you have a whole bunch of pieces done, and it kind of doesn't feel like you've put that much effort into it, I think. And it'll save you a little bit of time and a little bit of thread. So I have these hourglass units. These all still need one more side sewn, so I'm going to set those aside for my next chain. And I'm going to press these little units for my blocks and then do the same thing again and keep adding the next step, sewing a chain, adding the next step, sewing a chain until my blocks are completely done. I'm going to finish these blocks and get out all of the units that I have sewn so far, and we're going to see how they start looking coming together for a top. Okay, I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so I finished those 2 blocks and I think these turned out super cute. And I set up a little design wall behind us so that we can see how these first couple of rows are going to start to look. And you'll see how the design is going to come together as we add the alternating hourglass blocks
and the sampler blocks. So let's see how it's going to look. The plan is with 36 of each, we have 72, so the quilt will be 8 blocks by 9 blocks. And we'll see how that looks. We can always make more, or if you just want to make fewer, that's fine too. But let's see, let's start with, let me glass blocks. Put that one up there. And this is just going to be a way for us to kind of visualize how they're coming together, and make sure that we have a good distribution of our colors in these first couple of blocks. Let's see, let's look through our pile a little bit and make sure that we add in a good variety of brighter ones and lighter ones, pink ones and purple ones. So all of the white fabric is the same, but the pink is some different ones. Let's see, I think we need a kind of a dark one right here. Some of these are less pink and more kind of peachish, but I decided to be pretty liberal with what I allowed myself to include so that there would be kind of a fun variety. And I wanted to use a lot of scraps for this project. So there is just all of the pinks that I could grab out of my stash that kind of fit in this sort of soft, like baby bubblegum pink color. What do you think? Do you think it's coming together? Let's see, what do we need right here? Do you think we need one that's like, well, we have a lot of purple in this one, so let's go with one that's kind of medium mix of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and oh, I'm not going to put that one because these have the same fabric there. Let's see. Let's do, I kind of like this one for that spot. You think? So this is going to be basically we'll be able to see what a third of our quilt looks like here. Alright, was this what you were expecting it to look like as we were making all of these blocks in the past videos? I hope it looks as good or better than what you might have expected. And I hope that yours is coming along as well. I would love to see it. So, can you see how our pattern is starting to come together? We have the sampler blocks really showing off in these bigger spaces with either the solid pink or the white squares. I think this is going to be a lot of fun once I start sewing them together and really seeing how it is, but I really like what I see so far. What do you think? Alright, well, as I sew these rows together, and when you do yours, you're going to sew the first row, of course, of 8 blocks, and you can do a couple of different things depending on how you feel about it. You can either press all of the seams to one direction. For example, in the first row, press all of them to the right, okay? And then when you sew the second row, press all of the seams to the left. And what that's going to do is when you go to sew them together, it'll reduce the bulk and help to guide you where those blocks come together so that you have sharp corners. The other thing you could do is just to choose to press toward all of the hourglass blocks, and since those alternate, then you know that they will oppose when the seams come together. So either just do them all one direction and alternate that with each row, or press them all of the blocks toward the hourglass blocks, and then when you put your rows together they will alternate. But I'm going to keep laying this out in the same configuration. This is about a third of my quilt because it's going to be a total of 9 rows. But I think that it's looking good so far. I would love to see what you guys are making. Leave a comment and let me know if you're working on this project with me, and what kind of colors, what kind of fabrics you're using. I'd also love to hear suggestions and feedback about the videos. Be sure and check out the previous videos in this series. I hope you've enjoyed sewing along on this project with me. Once I have my top sewn together, I'll be sure and share it on my website. I do post pictures of what I'm doing on my blog and on Instagram and that sort of thing, and we'll have to have a show and tell when we get it all finished. Okay? Alright, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, happy quilting.